And peace and blessings be on the best of His creation, the last of His prophets and apostles, the chief of the foremost and the latter ones, the redeemer of the sinners, our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. I begin by offering you the Islamic greeting of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. If we take a look at academics, theologians, philosophers, psychologists, sociologists across history, we will come forth to recognize that a group of people amongst these academic elite all claim that within the human body, within the human being, there is an innate nature to find certain divine qualities, to find certain absolute qualities. As Plato says in his theory of the forms, or as Aristotle writes in Neo-Machian ethics, that there are a group of individuals, or there are a group of qualities that a human being desires, universal qualities, like love, beauty, justice, knowledge, and so on. These few qualities have the ability to cause individuals to strive toward them. Every human being aspires them, recognizes them, wishes to have a part and parcel with these attributes. But if we take a look and examine history, when we want to find great role models, great individuals, and seek to address and find whether any of them had all of these qualities, can we do that? For example, in order that we break it down, we take a look and we find great leaders. We have George Washington, we have Napoleon, so on and so forth. Amongst these great leaders, do we speak about any other great attribute? Do we associate another attribute with them? When we talk about great leaders, do we speak about their generosity? Often no. When we think about great thinkers and academics, like Plato and Aristotle, and so on, do we speak about their courage in the battlefield? Not necessarily. When we think about a great attribute like mercy, we think about a person like Mother Teresa. Do we speak about her political affiliations? No. Because generally when we find a human being, we love that particular human being for the quality that they have, not necessarily for the qualities. Which is why when we come to understanding who is Hussain, the son of Ali, we find that the love that is spurred upon of 300 million people every single year on the same day in the Islamic calendar, the emotion and the tears and the screams and the movement that is Hussain, we find this great movement is achieved because Hussain himself was responsible for holding all of these qualities. If you look to seek justice, then look at Hussain. If you want to find beauty, then find it in Hussain. If you wish to find love, then find it with Hussain. If you want to find justice, then look no further than Hussain. In one day, in one barren desert, the lives of billions of people have been transformed. Why? Because Hussain, alayhi salatu wassalam, he represented all of the ideals, all of the absolute qualities. Let's take a look. If someone, first of all, every individual loves forgiveness, loves mercy, loves a merciful individual. Who is more merciful than Hussain? The man who was responsible for bringing him toward his martyrdom. When he stands in front of Hussain in his last moment, what does he come? He says, "Oh Hussain, I was the one who brought you toward this barren desert to be martyred only after a few moments. Do you forgive me?" What does Hussain say? He comes from the household of forgiveness. What do you expect him to say? If you want to seek love or find an example of true love, then what better example to go to than to those plains of Karbala in the household and in the tents of Hussain? we go ahead and we see there are individuals who were companions of Hussain on the day of Ashura in the land of Karbala, who are standing in front of him. And I've mentioned it time and time again for those of you who were at my sermons this past month of Muharram, that a man by the name of Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi, he stands in front of Hussain alayhi salam, and he transforms his own bodily nature to becoming a shield for Hussain. As arrows are being struck toward the Imam, what do we find? We see that there is one man who comes and he stands in front of those arrows to take those piercings. If a man was to receive something thrown at him, naturally he moves out of the way. But love causes people to do unique things. Thus we find true beauty and true love with Hussain. We find justice, we find morality, we find virtue, so on and so forth. Where do we find a better example of humanity than the example of Hussain? We talk about human rights, we talk about animal rights, when this man stood in front of 33,000 people, recognizing their vice, recognizing their cruelty, recognizing their tyrannical rule. Historians, they write that Hussain went behind his tent and he began to weep. He began to weep as he stood in front of those 33,000 people who wished to shed his blood. They came to him and they said, "Oh, leader of ours, why do you cry at such a sensitive time?" He says, "Because I understand that these people have gone astray from truth, from justice, from reality." When we want to come forth and understand the true nature of this question, who is Hussain? We see what? We come and we see firstly that Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam is found through several different outlets. We can understand him through different outlets. The first one of those is at the most basic form, from the outlet of theology. In Islamic theology, we have two sources of knowledge. The first source of knowledge is the Quran, the divinely revealed book, according to the Muslim tradition. The second is the hadith literature, those sayings which are attributed to the Prophet and his immaculate family. When we want to go ahead and we take a look at the Quran and we take a look and try to understand who is Hussain through the Quran, we have so many evidences. And because this is the least important, let us go through them very quickly. We all know that in chapter 33, verse 33, the Quran states that Hussain is from the household of the Prophet. For we all know, everyone knows, that Hussain is the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Secondly, we go ahead and we see in chapter 3, verse 61 of the Quran, God makes mention of Hussain being the son of the Prophet in what is known as the verse of Mubahala. We go ahead and we take a look at another verse of the Quran in chapter 42, which God states, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى, commanding all of the Muslims and all of the believers and all of humanity, at the very least, have intense love for the Prophet and his family. Quranically speaking, we have many other traditions which are attributed to Hussain within the Quran. But again, at the most basic level, we understand Hussain through this. Furthermore, we continue, and we see in the hadith literature that we find narrated in At-Tirmidhi, narrated from the Prophet, in which he states, Husaynun minni wa ana min al-Husayn, ahabba Allah man ahabba Husayna, that I am from Hussain is from me, and I am from Hussain. God loves the one who loves Hussain. We go ahead continuing in the Islamic tradition. We see that the Prophet is also attributed to saying, in Sunan At-Tirmidhi as well, that Hassan, the elder brother of Hussain, the other grandson of the Prophet, and Hussain are the leaders of the youths of paradise. And we go ahead and we take a look at this theologically, and we could spend many hours discussing that. But then we go ahead and we also try to understand Hussain from another perspective. And that is a perspective, number one, from his own words. For when anyone wants to understand the revolution of Hussain, and in order to give a context of who is Hussain, as we wish to aspire to do so in these brief moments, we look no further than the words of Hussain. 72 comrades of this man stood in a barren land, standing in front of 33,000 savages, wishing to shed his blood, wishing to shed the blood of his family and his companions, and so on. When they stood in front of them, what do we find? We find that Hussain, this man, stood for all virtue, stood for all justice, stood for all beauty. When he left the land of his grandfather, Medina, to come toward Karbala, we find that Imam al-Hussain spoke two words. The first one, in which he states that I do not leave the city except for one purpose. I do not leave for arrogance. I do not leave to attain fame. I do not leave to cause corruption, but rather my only purpose of this revolution, to come and be slaughtered in Karbala, is for one. And that is the idea that I am able to cause and lead reformation in the community. What type of man, when we speak about justice, when we speak about ethics, when we speak about morality, do we find that his only goal is for those absolute themes? Secondly, we find another word of Hussain, in which he states, مِثْلِي لَا يُبَايِعُ مِثْلَهُ, that a man like me can never give allegiance to a tyrannical leader like him. We know that the leader of those 30,000 who wished to shed the blood of Hussain and the family of the Prophet were led by Yazid, this tyrannical, despicable excuse of a human being, if we can even attribute these words to him. For a man who was an alcoholic and an open fornicator and an adulterer, a man who would love, and forgive me for saying this, or I will just leave it at that, because when we wish to attribute or personify the man of Yazid, perhaps it is not even open for us to discuss it in an academic setting such as this. Anyhow, we find that Hussain, he said that a man like me can never give allegiance to a man like him. When we wish to speak and understand and dissect these themes and these virtues and these characteristics of the absolute human being, we find that on one side Hussain says that I am me and he is he. That a man like me can never give allegiance to a man like him, because I am full of virtue and full of truth and full of justice, while the man standing opposite to me is a man full of oppression and sin and vice. But truly, when we come to understand the definition of Hussain, we see that throughout history, we find that in the Islamic centers and propagation leaders, they came forth to speak about Hussain solely as an individual who was a leader of, or as an individual to come forth to stand against political injustice. A man who only desired one thing, and that was to stand up against an oppressor. This is truly limiting Hussain and his attributes and his mission. And briefly, for just a couple of moments, I will conclude with these last couple of points. We find, number one, and most importantly, that the mission of Hussain and that contemporary relevance that we speak about today in the ways that we send out our water bottles and invite people to our gatherings should be done in a way to allow people to know Hussain by being what are known as Hussainis. When we talk about these great virtues and these great characteristics and this great personality of this man, rather than only limiting him to a man who stood up to social injustice, which certainly he was, and absolutely he was, rather we wish to be of those who manifest his qualities, manifest the justice of Hussain, and the beauty of Hussain, and the peace of Hussain, and the love of Hussain, and all that which he stood for. For when each and every individual, when we talk about this question, who is Hussain, we do not speak about Hussain only as a historical figure, or only as a man who was this number imam and he was this grandson of the Prophet. No, but rather we should see Hussain as a man living, as a man who is real, as a man who is present, as a man who stood for all of these ideas and all of these ideologies, and each and every one of us should be transformed into him. What do I mean? That when we say that this message of Hussain is not limited to Muslims, not limited to any theological affiliation, not limited to any race, not limited to any language, fine, very good. But we have to be of those to apply the teachings in order that the message of Hussain is truly transformed and transforms us, transforms the community, and us as individuals. Let me explain just for a brief moment. We find, when we take the example of a prism, we find a prism, everyone knows prism. When the sun shines into it, the light is manifested in all different directions. Let the prism of our lives be Hussain. Let each and every one of us manifest that light that comes out in the idea that we demonstrate the mercy of Hussain, the forgiveness of Hussain, the love of Hussain, the justice of Hussain, and so on and so forth. If each and every one of us could take 1% of Hussain, manifesting those immaculate, eternal qualities, then there's no need for distributing water bottles. Then there's no need for gathering together and speaking about his merits or speaking about his virtues. Rather, if we become Hussain amongst our family members, amongst the community, amongst other individuals in our lives, we will demonstrate and we will see this great change. And briefly, because I was asked to speak briefly about some of the narrations that were mentioned about the character of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam, we find that one of them, narrated from the Imams of the Ahlul-Bayt, we find that one of the Imams, he states that Inna al-Hussain misbahun huda was safinatun najat, that surely this Hussain is the lantern of guidance and the ark of salvation. Why? Why does he receive such a lofty title and such a lofty name? When we speak about Hussain being the lantern of guidance, it is because in the midst of all vice, in the midst of all darkness, in the midst of all corruption, only one man stands up. And that man is our Hussain. Secondly, he is known as the Ark of Salvation. Why? Safinatun Najat, why? Why would someone coin Hussain the Ark of Salvation? We see that he is given this title because when someone is drowning in a ship, they're going to drown into an abyss of darkness. They're going to fall into all problems and in all difficulties. But in the midst of all difficulties, in the midst of all trials, and in the midst of all tribulations, there was one ship that rose above the water, and that is the ship of Hussain. And finally, we find that another name that is attributed to Hussain is what is known as Abul Ahrar, the father of freedom. Why? Father of freedom not only in his physical revolution. Like I said, let us not limit Hussain to a physical, historical context, or limit him to a theological context. Open your minds and open your hearts and become free through the mission and through the recognition and through the revolution of Hussain. He is known as Abul Ahrar because he broke the shackles of the human heart and he broke the shackles of the human intellect. He allowed people to think straight. He allowed people to realize truths. He allowed people to recognize justice and perfection and purity. For those of you who have come walking into this room without a historical context of Hussain, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry because your whole entire life you've never known who is Hussain. But today is the day, and now is the moment. And for each and every one of us who have limited Hussain to this theological imam of ours, or into a historical context of one battle, then truly now is the opportunity where we break those shackles, where we allow our heart and where we allow our intellect to fly and to ascend the skies and to ascend the spirits in order to truly know the reality of Hussain. This is why when we come to a gathering like this, as I wish to conclude, do not think that what I have done for Hussain, many people, especially, traditionally we have told, that offer anything to Hussain, and those of you who know the traditional Islamic Shi'i tradition will often hear this from the manabir and from the pulpits and from the masajid, that you offer something to Hussain and see what Hussain will do for you. I say no. I say that certainly this is a very powerful line and something that we benefit from, and certainly something that we can relate to, and certainly something that we actually do apply in our lives. But rather, beginning on a day like this, on a day in which we ponder the question, who is Hussain? Do not think what I can do for Hussain. Think, how can I become like Hussain? With With this, I would like to thank the Rutgers Ahlul-Bayt Student Association for giving me the opportunity to speak about Hussain, to speak about not only this man, but a man who represents something far greater. And like I said, for those of you who did not have knowledge about this man, then today is that day. Today is your day. Today is the day of reformation, and today is the day of reflection, and today is truly the day of revolution. Not only social revolution, as I believe our brother, our esteemed scholar will speak about after me, but also revolution of the hearts and revolution of the intellect. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.